Hey guys, what's going on? It's Chris. Hey, I'm super excited you guys are on here with me today. I know we got some hectic times around us right now, but thank you for taking the time to jump on here and hang out with me this evening. And I'm excited for this evening, and I hope some of you guys are too, because this evening we're starting our second week in our series titled Tomorrow. Now, last week we talked about tomorrow and the uncertainty that tomorrow has, especially right now with everything going on. But we also talked about the emotions that follow that uncertainty, that fear, that anger, that anxiety. And we also talked about that dude Isaiah, right? And how he used his confidence to combat those emotions, and how we can do the same thing. We can find our confidence in Christ and use that to combat those negative emotions that we have. Talked about Isaiah and how he interacted with God, and how he basically got called to the throne room. He interacted with the seraphim and God and all these things, and how then he went back and he talked to the leaders of where he lived and all that good stuff. But today I want to talk to you guys about one specific emotion that comes from that unknowing or that uncertainty, and that emotion that we're going to focus on today is fear. Now we all know what fear feels like. We've all been there. We've all been scared before, and it's that feeling in your gut, maybe that sense of danger, right? But I've actually, this is just kind of a quick side note, I've actually started this new thing while I'm here at home, where I hide around the house, and I wait for Cassie or for Colt to walk in the room, and then I jump out and scare them. And it's really funny. They don't think it's as funny as I do, but I've got some videos, and I'll show you guys the videos whenever we can be together in person, because Cassie would kill me if I put them up on the internet. But anyway, we've all felt that fear before, right? Maybe on an airplane, maybe you got scared for the first time you flew, or maybe you get just nervous about flying, or maybe it's around spiders, right? Nobody really likes spiders, I don't think. If you do, probably weird, but we all get uneasy. We've all felt that fear before. Now, maybe you've been fearful about the current world situation. Maybe you're fearful over this COVID stuff going on, but we've all been there. We've all felt fear. We've all been scared. But what is fear, though? If you pause and you think about it, what exactly is fear? Now, it can be difficult to define to ourselves, and some people use it like an acronym: false evidence appearing real, FEAR. Now, there's truth to that. You may have heard Raymond say that before. I know he's used it before in his preaching, but there's a lot of truth in it, right? There's plenty of times that I've been fearful of a situation. I've been scared of a situation that I'm going into. And then when I get to the other side and I turn around and I look at that obstacle with a new perspective from the other side of it, I laugh at myself for how silly I was, or how simple of a challenge was, or how once you see something from the other side, you start to understand why you didn't need to carry that fear with you through it. But sometimes the evidence is real, though, right? Sometimes the evidence is real. So I started looking into what is fear, how do we define fear, how do we quantify fear, all those kinds of things. And Google actually says fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. So dangerous, likely to cause pain, or a threat. Now, these are the broad things that cause fear. This is the generalization of what fear is. If it is dangerous, likely to cause you pain, or threatening to you, then it's likely to cause you fear. So if fear is something that we've all experienced, if fear is a natural emotion that we have, what do we do with it? What do we do with that fear when it hits us? Well, it turns out that that's exactly what matters. That's exactly the point. Now, fear is going to hit every one of us. We're all going to deal with fear at some point. But what we do with it is the entire point of what I'm trying to get across today. So open your Bibles real quick. We're going to open up back to the book of Isaiah. Now, again, Isaiah was a prophet, lived way back in the day. And last week we read from kind of the beginning of his book, Isaiah. And today we're going to read from chapter 41. And at the beginning when we were reading from first person point of view, right? It was him talking, it was his words. Well, now later this is him kind of prophesying. So when we read I, me, my in this part of the book, it's actually God speaking, right? So God is speaking through Isaiah, and Isaiah wrote it down so that we can learn from it later, right? So Isaiah 41:10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. So this is where, when I was preparing for all this is where I started to kind of lose my mind. This stuff, I don't know what it was about me that just didn't want to understand everything here, but in my mind when I read that, I was like, how can God say do not fear? How can he just say, hey, stop being scared? So to me that was almost impossible to do. It's such a natural reaction. How do you just stop it? So then I started studying it more. I prayed. I sought out help. I talked with Raymond on the phone for a while about it. But you see, it's not about the lack of fear. It's not about not getting scared sometimes. It's not what it's about. What it is about the actions that are based on that fear. It's about what happens when we are scared. Because see, so what happens is fear makes us selfish. Fear makes you want to take care of yourself, and it kind of makes sense because it's kind of instinctive, right? Like if a tiger is in your house, you want to survive, right? So it's a survival kind of thing. Now, the fears we're talking about aren't necessarily about tigers, wild animals, or any of that kind of stuff. The fears we're talking about in this series is the fear of the unknown. It's that uncertainty, and it's the anxiety that comes with that. Now, that fear that Isaiah is writing about here is about how to deal with fear. He's writing about not letting it consume you. Now, we're really given two options on where to place our trust when it comes to fear, because if you're trying to deal with fear, you need something to trust, right? If you're scared of something, you need something trustworthy. So we have two options. We can either trust in ourselves, and with that it's pretty common, we try to figure out how to deal with the situation. We try to plan, we stress over, we try to outwork whatever the challenge is or whatever we fear. Or we can place our trust in something else. So you can trust in yourself, or you can trust in anything else, right? So those are your two options. That other thing a lot of people trust is maybe their money, right? They're, well, if anything happens, at least I could fall back on this pile of money I have. Or maybe they trust in their parents, right? And they're like, well, if anything happens, at least I know my parents will be there to help take care of me. Some people decide to place their trust in the government, right? And we're not going to run down that rabbit trail. I'm not going to try to tell you guys what to think on that. But all of these things have the same weakness. All of these things that people want to place their trust in, whether it's yourself, your money, your parents, the government, whatever it is, they all have the same weakness, and that is that they are all temporary. All of these things that people try to place their trust in when they're scared are temporary. Now, I want to read a book. I want to read a book. I'm not reading an entire book to you. I want to read a story to you guys today from Gospel of Mark. Now, the story I'm going to read is recorded in 3 of the 4 Gospels. So you have your 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all decided to record this story in their book. Now we're using Mark specifically because Mark wrote very short and sweet and to the point. I like the book of Mark because it doesn't give a whole lot of fluff. It's very just kind of straightforward. Here's what happened, move on. Of Galilee. Now, this is just a little bit of context. The Sea of Galilee, right? The crowd gets while he's teaching. So he teaches with parables is what we call them. It's just stories that Jesus used to teach that basically just had a moral to them. And it was a way to put things into perspective for people or into their context so that they could understand it. So Jesus is teaching for a while, and then when he finishes is where we kind of pick up the story. So Mark chapter 4, starting in verse 35 is where we're at today. Verse 35 says, "That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat." So Jesus and his disciples are floating across the water. They just finished teaching and everything, and they're floating across the water chilling, right? Waves broke over the boat, and it was nearly swamped. Now, we don't have to have a ton of sailing experience to understand that water in a boat is bad. Is that fair? So they're in kind of a sketchy situation. And something to note here is the Sea of Galilee is not a very large body of water. And it's actually about 13 miles long and about 8 miles wide, so it's not huge. And to put that into our perspective, think of like Toledo Bend, right? Just south of here. It's not too far away. Toledo Bend's about 10 miles wide at its widest point, and it's about 65 miles long, right? So the Sea of Galilee don't think of it as this massive, vast, it's not the Atlantic or the Pacific or even the Mediterranean. The Sea of Galilee is really a lake, a substantial lake, but a lake. So the storms in the Sea of Galilee were very common though. So you see, the Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not connected to the ocean. There's land in between, right? So land goes downhill to a lake. About 700 feet below sea level. That's not super, super crazy. It's the lowest freshwater lake in the world. Kind of interesting there. But the Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level and is surrounded by highlands. Now, specifically to the northeast is Mount Hermon, however you want to say it. But to the northeast is Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is about 9,000 feet above sea level. So if the lake's 700 feet below and the peak of the mountain is 9,000 feet above, we're talking about almost 10,000 foot difference between the surface of the water and the peak of the mountain. Now, hot air rises, cold air falls. So hot air would rise from the surface of the lake, cold air would fall from the top of the mountain, and they would meet somewhere in the middle. And this create crazy storms right over top of the lake. So these storms weren't super uncommon on the lake. And another thing that's interesting to note is to think about who Jesus was with at the time. Now the first people who really followed Jesus physically, the first people who went and were like the first disciples and followed Jesus were two guys, Peter and Andrew. Now Peter and Andrew were brothers, but they were also both fishermen that fished the Sea of Galilee. Now, this would mean that these guys would be comfortable on the water, and that they would be comfortable on the stormy lake, right? They were kind of accustomed to it. They were used to it. But what makes that really interesting is what happens next in verse 38. So going on to verse 38, it says, Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. Jesus was in the stern, which is the back of the boat. Jesus was in the stern sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drowned?" So these guys that were used to the water, these guys that were used to being on a stormy lake, were scared enough to think that they were going to drown. Now it's pretty safe to assume because of that the storm was more significant than normal. So this was like a tornado to folks who were that were used to a kind of just a little shower, right? This is coronavirus to people who are used to the flu, right? These are different things. It's a little more extreme. So let's see how the story is. Going on to verse 39, it says, he, being Jesus, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Verse 40 says, he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Verse 41, they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." So we see in this story that these men were afraid. They were afraid of a very real threat. But when that fear hit them, they panicked. They didn't just ask Jesus to help them. Instead, they kind of went into a frenzy. Skip too many pages. They went into like a frenzy. They didn't stop and pray. Instead, they woke Jesus up and said, "Don't you care if we live? Don't you care if we drown?" They became selfish. They worried about themselves. They didn't think to simply let Christ be in control of the situation. They jumped all the way to questioning, "Don't you care?" Too often we do this in our own lives. Too often is this us in this situation. Don't you care if I pass that class? Don't you care if I lose my friends? Don't you care if I grow up without mom or dad? Don't you care? Don't you care? Christ stops and said, "Quiet, be still." Says to the storm, "Quiet, be still." Then he says to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Who is this that even the wind and waves obey him? The storm wasn't the issue here, guys. The storm is not the problem in this situation. Where the disciples decided to place their trust was the issue. Jesus knew that the storm was going to hit. This wasn't a surprise to Christ. Now, He knew that the men would be afraid. And fear is going to happen. That's normal. It's going to happen. And if anybody tells you that it isn't ever again, they're lying to you, because fear is going to happen. There's no denying that. But we have to remember the perspective. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. We talked about that last week in Isaiah also. He knows every single fear that you have had, and he knows every fear that you're going to have. None of it is a surprise to him. But being scared is not the problem. The problem is how we react. We really have two options here, guys. It's the same options I talked about before. We can try to deal with it ourselves, which we're never going to be strong enough. We're never going to figure it out. Or we can trust something else. The difference between Christians and everyone else is that Christians have Christ in their boat. Jesus is in our boat with us. So this reminds me of another story, of another time that the disciples were out on the water in a boat. And Jesus actually sends them out on the boat while he basically disperses a crowd that's around him. And he sends them out and he says, hey, I'll see you on the other side. Then he comes walking out on the water, and that's the whole Jesus walked on water story, right? So what happens next is once they get out there, the disciples got scared again, right? They got scared, they got nervous. Seems like every time people are in the presence of God, they actually get scared. It's interesting how that works. But they get scared, and Peter, one of the disciples, one of the first disciples, says, hey, if that's really you, call me out. So Christ says, come, and Peter gets out of the boat and he walks on the water. Now while Peter was focused on God, while he was focused on Christ, and he was kind of on the same wavelength as God there, they were on the same page together, and he was doing as commanded and walking out on the water, everything was good. And then shortly afterward, Peter takes his focus off of Christ and he focuses on the wind and the waves around him, and then he breaks to the surface of the water. Now, we use that story a lot of times to talk about faith and how, like, when you have that kind of faith, anything is possible. And that's true, and that's a great way to use that story. And actually, this week while I was getting ready, I was talking again to Raymond, and when we were talking through that story a little bit, because it's really one of my favorite stories in the Bible, but as we were talking about it, we started saying, but what about those guys that were also in the boat with Peter? When Peter got out and started walking on the water, those guys stayed in the boat. Now we often look at it and we're like, man, Peter, you were walking on the water. It was happening, man. Why'd you stop? But we never think about the guys who didn't even get out of the boat. The guys who were too scared to even step onto the water. Whether it is that you're scared to get out of the boat, or you're scared to even be in the boat in the storm, is irrelevant. What's relevant is you cannot let those fears control your actions. We have to remember that this is an intentional relationship between ourselves and Jesus Christ. This is an intentional relationship that we're having. That doesn't mean that we can do anything to make him love us or to make him love us more. We do everything because he loves us. We place our trust in him because we know he loves us. Guys, I just want you guys to take that into this next week and throughout this whole time with all this who knows what going on, with all the craziness, the shutting down schools, the closing grocery stores. There's some states that are like only letting you buy certain things from grocery stores. So not only is it only essential travel, it's essential travel for only essential things. So it's getting crazy. But we have to remember that it isn't about being nervous or being scared or being uneasy. It's about recognizing that sovereignty that we talked about last week. It's about recognizing the fact that we know God is in control. We know Christ is in control. We trust them because Christ loves us. We trust in Christ because he loves us. He showed us that. We're here right after Easter. He showed us that on the cross. As he hung on the cross and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Father, forgive Chris. He doesn't know what he's doing. He loved us to the point that even while he was dying, while his physical body was broken and bleeding, he was saying forgive them. That love that he showed is why we trust in Jesus. All right, guys, let me pray for us real quick, and then we'll call it quits for this week. So, dear Heavenly Father, just thank you for this day. Thank you for the time that we're able to spend here, even though we can't be in the same room. Lord, just thank you for this technology, the ability to still continue to spread your word, whether or not we can be in the same room. Lord, even if this is the new normal, whatever this is going to be, Lord, we just thank you that you give us the ability to still be able to continue to spread your word. Lord, I pray that you keep in the forefront of our minds each and every week, each and every day, that while, yes, we're going to get scared, the world can be a scary place, the world can be a dangerous place, that we don't let that control us. We don't let those fears, no matter how big or how small, stop us from doing work for you. We don't let that stop us from continuing to seek after you and to promote you and to promote your glory and lift you higher. Lord, it makes me think of David and Goliath. There's no way that David was comfortable in that situation, Lord, but no matter how big that competition in front of him was, he was still able to win that fight for your glory. Lord, I thank you for each and every person here under the sound of my voice. I pray that they have heard you speak through me. I pray that they take these words that they've heard today and they go forward with them, and they use this knowledge that you have shown them through me and through your word to be able to just impact the world more around them, for them to be able to spread your word and to just move throughout this life, especially right now in the circumstances we're in, with confidence, Lord, with confidence. Lord, thank you for your Son. Thank you for your sacrifice. And in the mighty name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, guys. Cool. I hope you guys enjoyed week 2 of our series tomorrow. I'm gonna keep your heads up. Remember, this isn't the end of the world. It may feel like it. It may feel like it, but it's not the end of the world. And one day, things are going to be back to normal, or we'll have a new normal or whatever, and we'll grow through it and it'll be fine. But just remember that the fear isn't necessarily the issue here. It's the actions that you have based on those fears of when it becomes a problem. Thanks again, guys, for hanging out, and we'll see you next week.